The strangest part about coming home from deployment wasn't the silence. It was hearing strangers laugh inside my house. My tires crackled over the loose gravel as I turned into Cedar Ridge Estates at 1:13 in the morning, the dashboard of my old Ford pickup glowing faint green against my hands. The neighborhood looked exactly the way I remembered it before Syria. Same trimmed lawns. Same identical mailboxes. Same warm yellow porch lights stretching down the street like runway markers. But something felt off the second I saw my driveway. There was a silver Honda Odyssey parked where my truck was supposed to be, and a little pink bicycle leaned against my garage door like it had always belonged there. I sat there for a second with the engine idling, listening to the ticking sound under the hood and the faint buzz of cicadas in the Texas heat. My duffel bag rested on the passenger seat beside me, still coated in pale desert dust from overseas. 11 months gone, and all I wanted was a hot shower, cold beer, and 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep in my own bed. Then I looked up at my front window and froze. The lights were on. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Somebody was inside my house. At first, I honestly thought maybe my sister had stopped by to clean the place up for me. Maybe one of the neighbors was checking on it. But then I heard laughter. A man laughing. A kid running across hardwood floors. And the muffled sound of a TV playing somewhere deeper in the house. My chest tightened hard enough to hurt. I killed the engine and stepped out into the humid night air, boots crunching softly against the driveway. The smell hit me before I even reached the porch. Pizza. Laundry detergent. Somebody's fabric softener vent blowing through the side yard. Lived-in smells. Comfortable smells. I climbed the steps slowly, my deployment bag hanging from one shoulder, and pulled out my house key. The porch light buzzed softly overhead while I slid the key into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. Wrong lock. Wrong key. My stomach dropped. I looked closer and realized the deadbolt had been replaced. Brand new brushed nickel hardware where my old brass lock used to be. I just stood there staring at it while the TV laughed on the other side of the door. Then footsteps approached from inside. The handle turned, and the front door opened. A little blonde girl, maybe 7 years old, stood there holding a juice box in one hand. She wore oversized gray army hoodie sleeves hanging past her fingers. My hoodie. The same one my younger brother wore before he died 3 years earlier. Behind her I could see family photos on my wall. Different family. Different people. A woman appeared behind the little girl and immediately pulled her closer. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at me like I was the intruder. I looked past her shoulder into my own living room. My father's leather recliner was gone. Different curtains hung over the windows. Even the rug had changed. Then the woman asked the question that nearly made me forget how to breathe. "Can I help you?" I do not think the woman knew she was living inside somebody else's life until she saw my face under that porch light. She tightened her grip around the little girl and glanced back into the living room like she was suddenly seeing the place differently too. I could hear a football game playing somewhere in the background and the low hum of my dishwasher running in the kitchen. My dishwasher. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stay calm because after 11 months overseas, your brain learns how to shut emotion behind a locked door. "This is my house," I said quietly. The woman blinked twice like she genuinely thought I was confused. Then a man stepped into the hallway behind her holding a paper plate with pizza crusts on it. Mid-30s. Sweatpants. White guy. Tired eyes. He looked from me to the army duffel on my shoulder and immediately understood something was wrong. "Honey," he muttered carefully, "maybe we should call somebody." I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "I think you should." 10 minutes later I stood at the curb beside a patrol car, while 2 sheriff deputies listened to everybody talk at once. The little girl stayed pressed against her mother's side staring at me through the window like I was some ghost standing in the driveway. The husband kept apologizing even though none of this was his fault. He handed one deputy a lease agreement with my address printed right across the top. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association Property Management Division. My stomach twisted. I had never heard those words put together before. One deputy looked at my military identification, then at my Texas driver license. Same address. Same name. Same house. "Sir," he finally said, lowering his voice, "they have legal rental documents on file through the Homeowners Association. That house is not owned by the homeowners association, I replied. I bought it 6 years ago. The deputy sighed like he already hated where this night was headed. Then this is probably going to be considered a civil matter until the county offices open Monday morning. Civil matter. I remember staring at him after he said that, because it felt insane hearing those words while strangers slept inside my bedroom. The husband stepped toward me carefully and held out a folded piece of paper. Look, man, he said quietly. We rented this place 3 months ago from the HOA office. We thought the owner abandoned it. Abandoned. That word hit harder than I expected. I looked past him toward my garage and noticed something else missing. My mailbox. The black metal mailbox my brother helped me install the summer before he died was gone. In its place sat one of those newer HOA-approved plastic boxes with silver house numbers screwed into the side. Even my nameplate had disappeared. It was like somebody had erased me one piece at a time. Then headlights swept across the street as another car pulled up near the curb. A white Lexus SUV. The driver door opened and out stepped Linda Mercer wearing a cream-colored cardigan despite the heat. Perfect hair. Clipboard in hand. She walked toward us with the calm expression of somebody arriving at a neighborhood bake sale, instead of a man finding strangers inside his home. Sergeant Walker, she said smoothly before I even spoke. We were wondering when you might finally return. There are people who smile at you while dismantling your life piece by piece, and Linda Mercer had perfected that smile. She stood under my porch light with her clipboard tucked against one arm like this entire situation had already been filed, organized, and approved somewhere. The deputies stepped back slightly, letting her take control of the conversation without even realizing they were doing it. As I explained to the county office, Linda said calmly, your property was considered inactive for nearly a year. I stared at her. Inactive? She gave a tiny shrug. You stopped attending association meetings. Mail piled up. Lawn maintenance became inconsistent during your deployment. There were concerns regarding property value decline. I almost laughed at that. 11 months in Syria and this woman was talking to me about lawn maintenance. The husband standing near the doorway looked uncomfortable now, like he wanted to disappear entirely. His wife kept glancing between me and Linda while holding the little girl close against her side. We signed a lease, the husband said quietly. We thought everything was legitimate. I know, I replied. And I meant it. None of this anger was aimed at them. They were caught in whatever game Linda had been running. Linda flipped through papers on her clipboard and pulled out a document. The Homeowners Association exercised temporary stewardship authority under the Community Preservation Clause. She explained in that polished suburban tone people use when they think legal vocabulary replaces morality. The property was leased to prevent deterioration. You rented out my house, I said slowly, without contacting me. We attempted communication several times. I was deployed, and we had no confirmation regarding your return date. The words hit colder than I expected. Not your house. Not your service. Your return date. Like I was some shipment delayed overseas instead of a human being standing 10 feet from her. One deputy cleared his throat awkwardly and checked his watch. The other shifted beside the patrol car like he desperately wanted the night to end. Linda noticed it too. She always noticed leverage. Perhaps we can discuss reimbursement for your inconvenience tomorrow morning, she said smoothly. The association would even be willing to arrange temporary hotel accommodations. Temporary hotel accommodations. I looked past her toward my garage again. The motion light flicked on automatically, spilling pale light across stacks of plastic storage bins pushed against the walls. My storage bins. Half my life sat crammed in there while strangers slept inside my bedroom. I walked toward the garage without saying another word. One of the deputies called after me, but I ignored him. The garage door groaned upward slowly, and hot air rolled out carrying the smell of cardboard, gasoline, and old dust. My belongings were stacked everywhere with bright orange inventory stickers attached to them. Storage. Relocation. Abandoned items. My jaw tightened when I saw those words. Then I spotted an old green military footlocker shoved near the back wall beneath a folded camping chair. I recognized it instantly because my brother Ryan had spray-painted a tiny white star on the side when we were teenagers. I crouched beside it and opened the lid carefully. Inside sat my folded American flag in its wooden display case, my father's funeral photograph, my service medals, Ryan's dog tags, and resting across the top like somebody had tossed it there without thinking was an old motion camera from the garage workbench. The small red battery light was still blinking. I stared at it for a long second while the muffled sound of Linda's voice drifted in from outside. Then I reached over and pulled the memory card out with shaking fingers. I barely slept that night. Around 3 in the morning I sat inside my truck parked across from my own house with the air conditioner humming softly, and the memory card plugged into an old laptop balanced on my steering wheel. Cedar Ridge looked peaceful at night. Sprinklers clicked across perfect lawns. Porch lights glowed amber against quiet sidewalks. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and stopped. It looked like the kind of neighborhood people trusted automatically. That was probably why Linda Mercer had gotten away with this for so long. I opened the video files one at a time while condensation from a gas station coffee cup rolled down my wrist. Most of the footage was normal. Empty. Driveway. Delivery trucks. Rainstorms. Kids riding bikes past the mailbox. Then the timestamps changed to about 6 weeks after I deployed. I watched Linda walk up my driveway holding a clipboard while 2 men in work shirts followed behind her carrying tool bags. One of them pointed toward my front door. Linda unlocked it. Unlocked it. I leaned closer to the screen. The date stamp burned bright in the corner while the 3 of them disappeared inside my house like they owned it. About 20 minutes later they came back out carrying boxes. More footage. Different day. The contractor replaced my locks while Linda stood there drinking iced coffee and talking on her phone. Then another clip loaded and I felt my stomach tighten harder than before. Linda and 2 HOA board members stood inside my kitchen laughing while one of them opened my refrigerator. The audio was distorted from the garage distance, but one sentence came through clearly enough to hear. Nobody deploys that long unless they are running from something. The 3 of them laughed after that. I paused the video and just stared at the screen. There is a certain kind of exhaustion that hits after deployment where your body stops reacting normally to anger. Everything slows down instead. Your heartbeat gets quieter. Your thoughts get colder. I sat there listening to my own breathing while dawn slowly turned the sky gray above the subdivision. Then somebody tapped lightly against my passenger window. I looked up fast out of instinct. An older man stood there wearing jeans, work boots, and a faded Vietnam veteran cap. I rolled the window down halfway. "You are Walker, right?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. "Name is Frank Delaney. I live 3 houses down." He glanced toward my home before lowering his voice. "You should know not everybody around here agreed with what they did." I studied him carefully for a second before unlocking the passenger door. Frank climbed in slowly and shut it behind him. He smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and motor oil. Without saying much else, he handed me a small flash drive. "What is this?" I asked. "Backups," he replied. I started recording HOA meetings after they find my grandson over parking his work truck outside overnight. He rubbed his jaw and looked back toward the house again. "Your situation came up more than once." I plugged the flash drive into the laptop. Audio files. Meeting recordings. Dates stretching back months. Frank pointed at one folder. "Listen to April." Clicked it open. Static crackled for a second before voices filled the truck speakers. Linda's voice came through immediately. Calm. Organized. Confident. The military owner on Cedar Ridge Court is ideal because he has no local family checking the property regularly. Somebody else laughed softly. Another voice asked whether they had legal authority. Linda answered without hesitation. Authority only matters if somebody challenges it. I looked over at Frank. "How long has this been happening?" His face hardened. "Long enough that you are not the first soldier they tried this on." By sunrise I realized something that made the whole situation even worse. Linda Mercer had not made a desperate decision. She had built a system. I sat inside my truck outside a 24-hour diner, just off Route 9 with cold coffee in my hand and Frank Delaney's recordings playing through my headphones one after another. The waitress behind the counter kept refilling my cup without asking questions. Outside the windows, early commuters drifted through the pale orange morning light while 18-wheelers rolled past on the highway. Normal people starting normal days. Meanwhile, I was listening to strangers casually discuss how to take over my life, while I was overseas wearing body armor in 100-degree heat. One recording mentioned a Navy mechanic stationed overseas. Another mentioned a divorced National Guard member who had supposedly lost track of HOA notices during flood deployment support in Louisiana. Same language every time. Temporary stewardship, community preservation, administrative occupancy. They hid theft behind polished suburban vocabulary. Around 8:30 in the morning my phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was the husband from my house. His name was Daniel Harper. "I think you should know something," he said quietly after I answered. Could hear his daughter watching cartoons somewhere in the background. "Linda came by this morning before 7. She told us not to communicate with you unless lawyers were present." I stared out the diner window. Why would she do that? Silence lingered for a second. "Because she looked nervous," he admitted. That caught my attention. Up until then Linda had acted untouchable, calm, controlled, like she had done this enough times to stop worrying about consequences. But nervous people make mistakes. "Did she say anything else?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "She kept asking whether you mentioned military attorneys." I almost smiled at that. Not because I had any attorney lined up yet, but because fear had finally entered her calculations. After the call ended, I opened my old Platoon group chat for the first time in almost 5 months. The screen filled instantly with old photos, stupid memes, deployment jokes, and arguments about football teams. Most of us were scattered across the country now. Different states, different jobs, different lives. But some bonds do not really disappear after deployment. They just go quiet for a while. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I kept the message short. "Need help. HOA illegally rented my house while I was overseas." I attached one screenshot from the security footage showing Linda inside my kitchen. Then I put the phone down beside my coffee cup and exhaled slowly. 2 minutes passed. Nothing. Then the first notification appeared. Marcus Reed, former squad leader, now practicing real estate law in Denver. Call me immediately. Another message popped up before I could even respond. Tyler Bishop, former communications specialist, currently working cybersecurity for an insurance firm in Atlanta. Do not delete anything. Back up all files now. Then another. Ben Alvarez, Military Police Reserve. Did local law enforcement document the property access? My phone started vibrating nonstop across the counter. Names I had not spoken to in years suddenly lit up the screen one after another. Guys from Kuwait, Germany, Syria, Poland. Men who had slept beside me in desert tents and freezing transport trucks were waking up across the country reading about what happened to my home. One final message appeared from Marcus. "You are not handling this alone." I leaned back in the diner booth and looked down at the flood of notifications while the smell of bacon and burnt coffee filled the air around me. And for the first time since returning home, Linda Mercer no longer seemed like the most dangerous person in Cedar Ridge. Saturday morning arrived heavy and gray. The kind of humid Texas morning where the air already feels thick before 9 o'clock. I had slept maybe 2 hours inside a roadside motel beside the interstate, but my phone had not stopped vibrating once through the night. Messages, emails, missed calls. By sunrise, Marcus had already reviewed the lease documents Daniel Harper sent over. Tyler had traced the Homeowners Association payment portal to a private account connected to a shell company registered 2 counties away. Ben had contacted somebody he trusted in military legal assistance. The deeper they looked, the uglier everything became. Around 8:15 that morning, I parked across from Cedar Ridge again with a cardboard cup of black coffee warming my hands. The neighborhood looked calm on the surface. Sprinklers sprayed across trimmed lawns. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalk. Somebody nearby was grilling bacon because the smell drifted through the warm breeze between the houses. But tension sat underneath everything now. Curtains moved when my truck rolled by. Neighbors watched longer than before. People knew something was happening. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Do not leave. We are close." 5 minutes later, I heard the first motorcycle engine somewhere beyond the subdivision entrance. Deep, low, familiar. Another engine followed behind it. Then another. I looked up through the windshield as 3 Harley motorcycles rolled slowly past the neighborhood sign and into Cedar Ridge in a staggered line. No loud revving. No dramatic entrance. Just steady engines echoing through the quiet streets. The riders wore jeans, boots, old military jackets, and faded baseball caps. Marcus Reed pulled in first and parked beside my truck. He stepped off the bike carrying a leather folder under one arm and nodded once at me through mirrored sunglasses. "Morning," he said calmly. "Morning," I answered. Then more vehicles started arriving. Pickup trucks, SUVs, one old Jeep covered in road dust from Oklahoma, another black truck with Marine Corps stickers across the rear window. Men climbed out carrying coffee cups, duffel bags, laptops, and stacks of printed paperwork. Some had gray in their beards now. Some limped slightly from old injuries. But the second they gathered near my driveway, it felt exactly like deployment all over again. Quiet competence. Everybody already understanding their role without needing instructions. Daniel Harper stepped outside my house holding his daughter's hand. His expression changed immediately when he saw the growing line of veterans standing calmly along the curb. "You know all these guys?" he asked softly. "Most of them," I replied. Across the street, blinds snapped shut inside Linda Mercer's house. A few seconds later her front door opened and she stepped outside clutching her phone against her chest. Her confident smile from 2 nights earlier was gone now. She looked from truck to truck counting faces while the neighborhood slowly came alive around us. Garage doors opened. Dog walkers slowed down. People stopped pretending not to stare. Marcus finally walked toward Linda holding the leather folder. "Good morning," he said politely. "I am attorney Marcus Reed representing Sergeant Ethan Walker regarding illegal occupancy fraud and unauthorized leasing activity." Linda blinked hard. "This is highly inappropriate," she snapped quickly, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Marcus handed her a copy of the preliminary filing paperwork without changing expression. "Actually," he replied calmly, "what was inappropriate happened while my friend was deployed overseas." Behind him, Tyler sat on the hood of a truck with a laptop open tracing financial records, while Ben spoke quietly into a phone near the sidewalk. No shouting. No threats. Just organized pressure settling over Cedar Ridge like a storm front. Linda looked around the street and finally realized something important. Ethan Walker had returned home alone. But Sergeant Walker had not. The strange thing about organized people is that they leave organized evidence behind. By noon, Cedar Ridge no longer felt like a quiet suburban neighborhood. Felt like a command center. Marcus had transformed the folding table outside my garage into a temporary legal station covered in printed documents, county records, and highlighted lease agreements. Tyler sat nearby with 2 laptops open, running background searches while old military radio playlists played softly from somebody's truck speakers. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with motor oil and black coffee drifted through the humid air, while neighbors pretended to check their mail just to get closer to the driveway. Linda Mercer had disappeared back inside her house almost an hour earlier, but her blinds kept twitching. She was watching everything. Tyler suddenly snapped his fingers at the laptop screen. "Found it," he muttered. Everyone nearby looked up instantly. He rotated the computer toward Marcus and me. The Homeowners Association rental payments were routed through a company called Cedar Community Housing Solutions. Marcus frowned. "That sounds fake because it is fake." Tyler nodded. "Registered 8 months ago." He tapped another section on the screen. "Registered by Linda Mercer's cousin." Marcus let out a low whistle while flipping through another stack of papers. "That means the association itself never officially received the money." "Exactly," Tyler replied. "The lease payments went into a private business account." Across the driveway, Ben Alvarez stepped away from his phone call looking grim. "Military legal assistance confirmed something else," he said. "Under federal protections, targeting deployed service members for property exploitation can trigger serious penalties if intent is proven." Marcus gave a dry laugh. "Well, lucky for us, Linda apparently recorded her intent during HOA meetings." Frank Delaney sat in a lawn chair near the garage entrance sipping iced tea while listening quietly. "Told you she got too comfortable," he muttered. Then Daniel Harper walked slowly down the driveway carrying another folder in his hands. His wife followed behind him looking exhausted and embarrassed. "I think you should see these," Daniel said. Inside the folder were copies of every email Linda had sent them before moving in. One sentence immediately caught Marcus's attention. Preferred tenants should avoid discussing occupancy questions with neighboring residents due to possible confusion involving prior ownership. Marcus looked up sharply. Prior ownership? Daniel nodded uneasily. At the time we thought she meant foreclosure complications. Tyler leaned back in his chair staring at the screen. No, he said quietly. She meant Ethan. The realization settled over everyone at once. Linda had not just rented my house illegally. She had intentionally hidden my existence from the neighborhood and the tenants themselves. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a local investigative reporter named Claire Bennett. Apparently one of the guys from the Platoon had quietly contacted her earlier that morning. Is it true an HOA rented out a deployed soldier's home? She asked immediately after I answered. I looked across the street toward Linda's perfectly trimmed front yard. Yeah, I said calmly. And I think this is bigger than one house. About 30 minutes later, another discovery hit even harder. Tyler opened a county archive search and pulled up 3 additional addresses connected to Cedar Community Housing Solutions. All belonged to military owners who had been deployed or temporarily relocated. One was a Navy reservist. Another belonged to an Air Force mechanic overseas. The last owner had eventually sold the property after returning home during a divorce. Marcus slowly removed his sunglasses and rubbed his eyes. This was a business, he said quietly. Nobody answered him because everybody already understood the same thing. Linda Mercer had not panicked because veterans showed up on her street. She panicked because for the first time somebody had finally started connecting all the dots. By late afternoon, Cedar Ridge had stopped pretending everything was normal. News travels fast in suburban neighborhoods, but scandal moves even faster when military veterans and television cameras are involved. Claire Bennett arrived just after 4 o'clock driving a dusty blue SUV, with a local news station logo on the side. A cameraman stepped out behind her carrying equipment, while neighbors suddenly found new reasons to stand outside on their driveways. Some watered lawns that did not need water. Others checked mailboxes for the 3rd time that day. Everybody wanted a closer look without looking obvious. Claire walked straight toward me holding a microphone at her side while the humid air buzzed with cicadas around us. Sergeant Walker? She asked. I nodded once. I appreciate you coming, she said quietly before glancing toward Linda Mercer's house. I have been hearing some very interesting things for the last 2 hours. Marcus handed her copies of the lease agreements and several screenshots from the security footage. Tyler showed her the shell company registration records, while Ben explained the timeline involving my deployment overseas. Claire's expression changed slowly the more she read. She actually leased occupied military property through a private company, she asked under her breath. Looks that way, Marcus answered calmly. Across the street, Linda finally stepped outside again holding her phone tightly against her chest. The second she noticed the camera crew, her entire posture stiffened. She marched across the road with forced confidence, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. You cannot film private residence without consent, she announced loudly before even reaching us. Claire did not react. Ma'am, we are standing on a public street. Linda ignored her and pointed directly at me instead. This entire situation is being manipulated for attention, she snapped. The association acted lawfully under emergency community preservation procedures. Tyler almost laughed at that. Marcus simply adjusted his sunglasses and held up another document. Then perhaps you can explain why rent payments were routed into a company owned by your cousin. For the first time since this started, Linda looked genuinely cornered. Her mouth opened slightly but no words came out right away. The camera caught every second of it. Around us more. Neighbors drifted closer pretending not to listen. Then Daniel Harper stepped forward unexpectedly. His wife stood beside him holding their daughter's hand while cameras rolled. Daniel looked nervous but determined. She told us the homeowner abandoned the property, he said clearly. We never would have moved in if we knew somebody was deployed overseas. Linda spun toward him instantly. Daniel, this is inappropriate. No, he replied quietly. What was inappropriate was lying to us. The entire street went silent after that. Even the cicadas seemed quieter. Claire's cameraman slowly zoomed closer toward Linda, while she looked around searching for control that no longer existed. Then another vehicle pulled into Cedar Ridge. Black sedan. Government plates. Ben noticed it first. Well, he muttered softly beside me, that was faster than expected. Two men stepped out wearing plain polo shirts with identification clipped near their belts. One carried a leather case. The other held a tablet already open with documents displayed across the screen. They walked directly toward Marcus before briefly introducing themselves. Federal housing fraud investigators. Somebody nearby actually gasped loud enough for everyone to hear. Linda's face lost color immediately. "This is outrageous," she whispered. One investigator looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, we are here regarding allegations involving unauthorized occupancy management connected to deployed service members." The phrase hit the entire neighborhood like thunder. Deployed service members. Not missing paperwork. Not HOA misunderstanding. Not community maintenance. The truth finally sounded as ugly out loud as it actually was. Then, while cameras rolled and neighbors watched from every direction, one of the investigators asked Linda the question that changed everything. "Would you mind explaining why your signature appears on multiple leasing authorizations for military-owned homes?" 3 weeks later, the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association office sat dark behind locked glass doors with a bright legal notice taped across the entrance. The neighborhood looked different now. Quieter. Less polished somehow. Like the illusion had cracked and everybody could finally see what had been hiding underneath it. Federal investigators had seized financial records, computers, archived emails, and leasing documents tied to Linda Mercer's private company. Local news stations kept replaying the footage of her standing speechless in the street while cameras rolled around her. Every few days another former homeowner came forward after recognizing the story online. Some had lost money. Others lost homes entirely after returning from deployments overseas to discover fines, liens, or unauthorized tenants attached to their properties. What happened to me turned out to be the thread that unraveled everything. Daniel Harper and his family moved out voluntarily once the investigation expanded. Before leaving, he walked across the driveway carrying a small cardboard box and handed it to me carefully. "We found this in the hallway closet," he said. Inside was my younger brother Ryan's old army hoodie folded neatly on top of several framed family photographs they had removed from storage. Daniel looked exhausted. "I am really sorry," he said quietly. "You do not owe me an apology," I answered honestly. "You were lied to too." His daughter waved awkwardly from the minivan before they pulled away for the last time. I stood there in the driveway watching their taillights disappear down Cedar Ridge Court, while warm evening air rolled through the trees overhead. Then Marcus stepped beside me holding 2 cups of coffee. "County-approved emergency restoration access this morning," he said with a faint grin. "Officially your house again." I looked toward the porch for a long second before answering. It never stopped being mine. Over the next several days, the platoon stayed longer than anybody planned. Tyler helped restore deleted files investigators recovered from HOA servers. Ben coordinated statements with military legal services. Frank Delaney practically adopted the entire driveway operation, bringing folding chairs, extension cords, and enough iced tea for 10 people every afternoon. Neighbors who barely spoke to me before deployment suddenly stopped by carrying casseroles and awkward apologies. Funny how courage appears after cameras do. One evening near sunset, Marcus and I rehung my father's folded flag above the fireplace exactly where it used to sit before everything happened. Dust floated through golden light spilling across the living room while old country music played softly from somebody's speaker in the garage. My house smelled like fresh paint, sawdust, and coffee instead of strangers. Familiar again. Real again. Later that night, I stepped outside onto the porch carrying a cold beer, while the rest of the guys laughed around folding tables in the driveway. Combat boots rested against cool concrete. Motorcycle engines ticked softly as they cooled in the dark. Across the street, Linda Mercer's house sat empty. She had resigned from the Homeowners Association 2 days after investigators executed financial warrants. Rumors spread that criminal fraud charges were coming next, though nobody seemed interested in defending her anymore. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now crossed the street to ask whether I needed help repairing fences or repainting trim. The porch light buzzed quietly overhead while warm Texas wind moved through the neighborhood. I leaned back into the chair and looked down at Ryan's hoodie folded beside me. Weeks earlier I had returned home believing somebody stole my house. But standing there listening to my platoon laugh under the driveway lights, I realized something else entirely. Linda Mercer thought deployment meant isolation. She thought distance made soldiers vulnerable. What she never understood was that some people come home with an entire platoon standing behind them, even years after the war ends.